Hi. So this month is a month when we tend to talk a lot about ancestors in animism. And there's a reason for that, because ancestors are almost like the basic core understanding of animistic relationships. And I'm going to explain a little bit about why I feel this way. The simple way of saying it is that we are all related to each other on the world tree. And I don't mean just like humans are related to each other. In animism, we're all related to every being in some way on the world tree, either closely related or not so closely related. And in that sense, we're trying to navigate a bunch of relationships the way we would with a family, a gigantic, huge family that can be very complicated sometimes, just like our human families are. And maybe the slightly more complicated way of explaining it is that I wrote a pamphlet years ago about guardian animal spirits, ancestors, and land spirits. But really, these are, in some traditions, all types of ancestors, or at least connected to ancestors. The guardian animal spirit may be, in some traditions, passed down through the family by the ancestors. It doesn't work like that with every tradition, but it's amazing how much of the time, how many examples there are of that idea. I don't know if that may turn out to be the minority of cases, but it's not just like one tradition that thinks that. Obviously, human ancestors are pretty universally honored in most traditions, and the idea there is that the ancestors and descendants are trading places with each other. We, the living, are going to one day be ancestors. The ancestors will come back as our descendants. And so, we're keeping each other going that way. And then land spirits is where it gets kind of interesting and complicated, because there's an idea that ancestors can either merge or be anything from important trees or features of the land to the elements or weather, or even food that shows up in a time of need, like fish suddenly showing up, or game suddenly showing up, or badly needed rains showing up during the farming season. So there's an idea that ancestors are working through those things too. And the spirits of the land would be like a very powerful mountain or something like that, would be where maybe the most spiritual and refined ancestors might go after they die, to continue to be teachers and guides to the young. So there's lots of examples of saints or powerful mystics being associated with a particular spring or cave or something like that. That's another version of this. So within that, you have this idea that how can there be all these different kinds of ancestors? Ancestors who can send you power animals, ancestors who are venerated, and then ancestors who are also in the land or can even be food. It's like everything is ancestors. But I think that one of the simpler ways to look at that is that these are ways of understanding how the world tree connects us all together. If we understand that ancestors are sort of working through, like connective tissue through the world tree, to help us understand the other beings that inhabit it, it makes it a little easier to feel connected, and that's what you want. Animism is ultimately, for me, a path of feeling my connection to all beings in some way. Very different from the way we're taught to think about life in a very sort of clinical and analytical sort of way. So that's one of the reasons why I designed this class that I'm teaching for 2 months, Ancestors and Elements, is because I wanted to bridge the gap from our human ancestors to animals or spirit beings who are associated with our ancestors to the actual elements themselves. So using, once again, the ancestors as sort of the connected tissue through that whole thing. So one of the things that's important is that it's important to have ancestral guides who are what they might call well or refined, because unhealthy ancestors, or ancestors who have never successfully made it to the land of the dead, can carry problematic energies, while ancestors who have successfully crossed to the land of the dead don't have an agenda and are just there basically to create good relationships with the living, because they are in the process of coming back in some way, either as descendants or as features in the land or as holders of the ancestral memories. So what you're ultimately aspiring to create is a connective tissue of relationships with spirits, helping spirits. Some of them might maybe even pass down from your ancestors. Relationships with the ancestors themselves, and then places in the land that were mapped out by the wisdom of the ancestors, where you go to understand how to live better and how to be in balance while you're here on this earth. And then, the ancestors that show up as elements or as food or other things, that's also a part of this sort of like ancestral world tree matrix. So how do you navigate this? Well, if your ancestors, if you're very healthy, you have a healthy family, and you have a tradition, you have elders who are helping to monitor this and who help organize when ceremonies need to happen and things like that. But if you're a Westerner and you're trying to reclaim these things, you have two choices. And I've spoken about this a little bit before, but I'm going to try to speak about it from a different point of view. You can connect with a tradition where elders have already worked out all this stuff for you. And it's kind of like adopting or being adopted by a bunch of really, really healthy ancestors. And then what you have to do is harmonize your ancestors and where you live to that tradition, which can take a lot of work. Or you can reconnect to your wise and well ancestors, and you can bring back or continue their traditions, their folklore. Or you can do both. Neither is better than the other. Both are powerful. Both have downsides. But the idea is of doing something where these wise and well ancestors are there holding this traditional knowledge, this wellness, this energy of how to navigate the world tree as a living human being on this earth. And that means you don't have to be responsible for the whole thing. You just have to be responsible for doing your part, which is to maybe leave some offerings, to ask for help, to maybe have an altar if that calls to you, or a bundle, to say thank you, things like that. But it's not your job to remember everything. That's the ancestors' job. And then they talk to us through our dreams, through synchronicities, through messages, through diviners, human diviners, or other spirit workers, even through our bodies. They talk to us and tell us things that way. So it's not our job as humans, especially Western humans, to create this whole cosmology out of whole cloth and bring it down. It's our job to sort through all of these different relationships with the elements, relationships with the ancestors, relationships with our spirit helpers, relationships with the plants and animals and people and land outside and inside our homes, that keeps us quite busy as living human beings. And when we get stuck, we're taught to either go to an elder if you're lucky enough to have one, or go directly to the ancestors. Now, there are two things that can mess up the telephone connection between us and the well ancestors. And the first one is ghost energy or other types of interfering energies. Cleansing is one of the best ways to deal with that, and a really simple way is to work with chamomile baths. There's different traditions that have different baths or cleansing methods to connect with the ancestors, so I'm just pulling that out as just a generic, raise your vibration, easy to get herbal bath. And the way I was taught by Erica Buenaflor to do a cleansing bath is to take your normal bath or shower. You've already made a warm infusion of chamomile. And then after you've completely rinsed off, instead of getting out of the shower and drying off, you make either another bath and pour the chamomile in, and then sit down and pray to your spirits to cleanse you, or you can pour it over your body while you're standing in the shower, the chamomile. Either way, you don't rinse off afterwards. You just dry off and let the medicine work. These baths have a mild healing, physical healing, because in some herbal traditions, herbal baths are one of the ways that you take remedies. But it's really more meant as a spiritual gateway for the ancestors and other spirit helpers to help. Afterwards, you can also do this as a hand bath, where you just put the herb tea into a bowl and put your hands in the water and just let them, and then dry them off without rinsing them off. So either way, then what you do is you wait for dreams or synchronicities or other forms of divination that will let you know that you're connected to your ancestors. So I'm going to stop now for a while because I've sort of rambled for a bit, but these are just some ways to clear out the connections, or the disruptions to the connections, so that you can let those lines of communication with the ancestors be more clear. Now, the other way you can do it is to have an ancestral altar and to leave offerings that are specific to your ancestors. The most generic one is a bowl of water. That one's pretty universal, and then you change it every day. But there are some people who will work with specific ancestors. They'll have photos, they'll have favorite things that those ancestors liked. Or there are other people who work with spirits or deities who sort of watch over ancestral lineages, or the ability to connect with ancestors. And so you might leave offerings to them. It doesn't matter. You do what works. The important thing is just that those are two ways to kind of turn down the interference that ghost energy creates, so that you can have more successful communications with your ability to navigate the world tree.